Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. It's going to be a very long class, but a very important class. So this is a section which I've added into this class, which was not part of the previous class. It's actually part of the Islamic Law 2 class. But I brought it into this class because we managed to squeeze it in, and it's one of the important parts. In fact, it was supposed to be part of the Islamic Law 1 class before, because this is something that almost every Muslim needs to know, because these are issues that they encounter daily. So we're going to be covering today, inshallah, prohibited food and drink, intoxicants, transformation, animal slaughter, hunting, and eating manners, as well as clothing and all of that. So dress and grooming. So we're going to be trying to cover all of that today, inshallah ta'ala. So what I'm going to do is, while covering this, because this is probably what most Muslims have questions on. It's in the Muslim community, you find that they ask the most questions about these topics because they encounter them every single day, and because they're external. So eating what you eat, food that you buy, and clothing is external. So there's a lot of questions, whereas like fasting or praying, for example, is a personal thing. It's internal, so it doesn't become a social issue where you talk about it so much. You ask questions for yourself. But here, this is something where a lot of Muslims talk about. So every single time you're at a Muslim gathering or something, you'll find them talking about a lot of these topics. So I'm going to try and give you as much insight as I can in the small amount of time that we have. Okay? So let's start. Food and drink. So you should know that all food has been created for us by Allah. So Allah created us, and He created food for us as well, because we obviously need food in order to survive. And there's two reasons why He created food. One is for us to survive, and two, because actually we can enjoy the food. So it's a blessing. So food is not only there for us to live, but a lot of us enjoy eating food. Now, who enjoys eating food? I do. There's a lot of good types of food out there, right? So it's something that has a double benefit there. You need it, as well as you can, savor it and taste it and benefit from it. Even the Prophet, peace be upon him, he used to love certain foods. So he didn't just eat out of necessity only. He loved certain cuts of meat. Like he used to love the shoulder part of the animal. When it comes to his cut of meat, he likes certain types of food as well. So this is something that even he had. So you're allowed to like food. It's a blessing that we've been given by Allah. But there's a few things that have been prohibited for us in Islam that we're not allowed to eat. And the reason why they're prohibited is for our own good, because the things which are forbidden for us, either they're harmful spiritually or physically. There's some kind of spiritual harm, or there's some type of physical harm in there, or this could either be an individual harm or a collective harm. Maybe it harms you on an individual level, or maybe this may not harm you, but it's going to harm the society if they consume it. Right? So that's why these things are prohibited. But just so that you understand, I want to give you a very important context. You will find people saying, well, Islam is difficult, so hard, because why aren't we allowed to eat that animal, or why aren't we allowed to drink that thing, and that's all that's like half my diet and all of that. Let's just take a look at let's say animals, for example. Okay, look at the animals which we're allowed to eat. Okay, we're allowed to eat camels, goats, buffalo, sheep, horse, rabbits, cows, zebra, deer, antelope, gazelle, ducks, quails, parrots, locusts, sparrow, goose, ostrich, horse, dove, pigeons, roosters, chickens, peacocks, elephants, badgers, porcupines, all sea creatures, etc. And then you still find people saying, why can't I eat pork? Islam's so difficult, I can't eat pork. Well, you know what? Look at all the variety that you have to eat. Now, maybe in your culture, they happen to eat a lot of pork, right? But the fact that one type of animal is forbidden, and yet you have all these options to choose from, sometimes we get a little bit over picky, and we don't understand. It's actually not difficult at all. The amount of things which we're allowed to eat compared to the things which we're not allowed to eat is like 99% to 1%. We're actually forbidden from like 1% of potential foods in the world. And that's a very important thing to understand. So just keep that in mind. All right. So eating these prohibitions on the type of foods are very important. We have to take them very seriously. If you know the story of Adam, Adam was actually committed the sin and was ejected out of the garden because of the fruit that they ate that was forbidden for them. Right. So this is a very serious thing, something that we should reflect upon. So we're going to be talking about land animals, bird. These are the categories which we're going to be covering. So let's just start covering them. So land animals. Next slide. So land animals, when it comes to land animals, what's forbidden? Number one is swine. Okay. So swine, all the parts of a pig are forbidden in Islam. Right? Every single part of the pig. Interestingly, which many people don't know, that according to the Old Testament, it's also forbidden. Although most people don't practice that. But it's in the Bible as well. So in fact, if you want the reference, is Leviticus chapter 11, verse 7 to 8. So it makes good conversation. That it was forbidden as well, and yet most people don't know that. But all the parts of a pig are forbidden, whether it's a hoof, or whether it's the fat, or the meat, or the any part of it. Okay? So that's the one animal which is completely forbidden. And what could be one of the wisdoms behind it? Well, the pig actually is considered one of the filthiest animals in existence. And that's a proven fact. In fact, it even enjoys eating its own feces. So most people probably don't know that, but pigs actually do eat their own feces. In fact, there's something called pig toilets. Anyone heard of a pig toilet before? Yeah. In history, there used to be a lot of them. They're still prevalent in India and in China. Something called a pig toilet. Basically, a pig toilet it's a toilet where you sit down, go to the bathroom, and your waste literally goes from a chute, and it comes down, and it ends up in a place where there's a bunch of pigs just there. And the pigs literally are just waiting for you to finish so that they can go ahead and eat your excrement. And they still exist, actually. They still exist in India and in China, but they used to be very, very prevalent in the past. So that just shows you what kind of animal a pig is. So that could be one of the reasons why it's been forbidden. Now, even if you take care of pigs really, really nicely and well, there's still many health risks that are associated with eating swine as well. So let's say someone says, well, what if you don't let them eat their own feces? What if you keep them very, very clean and you bathe them and you keep them in a laboratory or something like that? Well, still they generally, have some type of, problem. Even if that was possible, Allah knows why He's prohibited it, on a societal level. So there's many health risks associated with it. Some of them are pigs actually have a lot of parasites and diseases that they harbor, and they can be transmitted to humans very easily. Some of the diseases that can be caused is called trichinosis, tyanasolium, cysticercosis, and brucellosis. So pigs are also known to have a lot of parasitic worms in their digestive tract. So this is why it's a pig is definitely considered a filthy animal. Now, is there a way to make it clean or something like that? Perhaps. But Allah has His wisdom in prohibiting certain things. So we should just keep that in mind. The second type of animal that's forbidden is carnivorous animals which hunt with their fangs or their claws. So any animal, a carnivore is an animal which does what? Eats another animal. It eats meat, right? So a carnivore that has a fang or a claw, and it hunts with that and it kills them. So it's not just a random animal, right? Like our cows, for example. They go and they throw some meat into the diet of a cow, although it's not supposed to be eating that. They do that, it's not a good thing, but that doesn't mean the cow becomes prohibited because it can potentially eat it. Cow is not supposed to, do that. But anyone that actually hunts and regularly is going to be eating meat, that type of carnivorous animal is forbidden for us in Islam. So two types of land animals. Now, why would it be forbidden? Well, we don't exactly know. Allah didn't explain to us why, but it could also be due to the health risks associated. Because look, the animal is eating another dead animal. It's not been slaughtered, the blood is in there, sometimes it's been rotten for a long time and they'll still eat it. So if you look at the research on it, these wild animals, they also cause trichinosis. But if you eat their meat and it's a little bit uncooked or a little bit raw, causes a lot of, they have a lot of worms and they have a lot of illnesses that can be caused from these type of animals. So what are these animals, right? Examples are lion, what else? I have a whole list here. Lion, cheetah, tigers, leopards, wolf, fox, dogs, cats, hyenas, monkeys, bears, and foxes. Right? These are like the animals which hunt with their claws or something like that. These are among the main ones. It's pretty much it. Right? So we're getting to birds. So these are land animals. Yeah, yeah. So these are, yeah, you're right. That's good. You're thinking no. These are so land animals, right? So I mean, does anyone actually eat these? By the way, it's rare for people to actually eat them. Has anyone ever eaten lion, cheetah, tiger, leopard, wolf, fox, dog, cat, hyena, monkey, bear, or fox? Anyone tasted it? So you don't have to worry about it. So it's not a problem. If you did, it's fine. But I mean, you know, it's anyways. So this is something that we should be avoiding as well. So that's pretty much it in terms of land animals. Everything else is okay. So this is an exhaustive list. If it's not a carnivorous animal which hunts with its fangs or its claws, or it's not pork, it's not swine, it's allowed. You can eat it. Okay. Then it comes to birds. Then it comes to actually, you know, let me comment with common questions, by the way. So on land animals, okay, on land animals we said pork, swine is forbidden. So there's something called lard, right? And lard is pig fat which people cook with. So we should be very cautious and careful when it comes to what we're eating. We make sure that there's no lard in it. Now for the Latino culture, it's unfortunate because they use a lot of lard in their cooking. Lard is often used in tortillas and it's used in refried beans. Right, so but now the good thing is it's becoming a trend in many places to stop using lard, because they know it's not a good thing, and there's a vegetarian vegan movement that's out there. So just look for places which have no lard in their refried beans and no lard in their tortillas or anything else. And it's not difficult to find, but people tend to use lard because it's a little bit cheaper. Not because necessarily it tastes better or because it's you know, healthier for you. So just be careful of lard. The second thing is gelatin. Right. So gelatin is basically it's a part of either the skin of the pig or some bone or something like that, where you wash it and you make this paste out of it, and it's usually made from pigs. So whenever you see gelatin, usually it's coming from a pig. But if you research it a little bit, there are different types of gelatin. So gelatin can come from fish, it can come from plants, it can come from cows, like beef, for example. There's beef gelatin as well. But if it doesn't say beef gelatin or fish gelatin or whatever, or doesn't have another logo to indicate that, it usually ends up being pork gelatin. So you should watch out for that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about transformation. There's another, we'll skip that one. What about an elephant? Is an elephant considered to be a predator? Has anyone ever eaten an elephant? No, so you don't have to worry about it, but just for your knowledge. Is an elephant, we said, hunts with the fangs or the claws. Does an elephant have fangs? It has tusks, right? Are the tusks considered fangs? Right? Does it actually hunt with those? Elephant doesn't really hunt with those. They're there only for like self-defense, maybe once in a while or something. They're going to use those tusks, those ivory tusks that they have. So it's allowed for you to eat elephants, okay? Because they're not considered to be, they're plant eaters basically. So that's when it comes to the land animals. When it comes to birds, carnivorous birds which hunt with their talons are the only ones forbidden, and the reason why they're forbidden is for the same reason as why the carnivores are forbidden. So for example, you have what do you have? You have falcons, eagles, kites, hawks, bats, vultures, and the like. Okay? Anyone ever eaten a bat before? An eagle? Anyone eaten any of these things? All right, so piece of cake for you to avoid this. You've already been doing it, right? However, you're allowed to eat their eggs because it's not the actual animal itself. So you can eat an eagle egg. You can eat a hawk egg or something like that. So you're allowed to eat the egg, but you just can't eat the animal itself. Okay, so that's it. When it comes to every other bird is allowed. So think of all the birds that are allowed: ostrich, chicken, pigeon, quail, parrot. This is a ton of them, right? So many different types of birds you can actually eat that are not carnivorous. Then moving on, there's sea creatures. So sea creatures are all allowed throughout anything in the sea. That's a sea creature, from octopus to shark to whales to killer whales to fish to eels to shrimp, dolphins. Everything is allowed in the sea, and you don't need to actually slaughter it either, right? If it dies, we're going to talk about slaughtering. Other land animals need to be slaughtered. Sea creatures, they don't need to be slaughtered because no one really slaughters a sea creature, right? You catch it, and when it comes out of the water, it dies. So you don't have to actually slaughter it and get the blood out of it. So we'll talk about that. But there are some animals which live on the sea and on land, and they have flowing blood, right? What are some animals which live on sea and land, back and forth? Frog, seals, otters, crabs, perhaps crabs, turtles, certain types of turtles, and one more. No. There's a running fish, yeah. Also, sea lions and crocodiles. All right, crocodiles. So when it comes to those, you have to there's a difference of opinion among Muslim scholars. Say, well, wait a minute. Is it considered more of a land animal or more of a sea animal? Right, so which one is it really being classified as? Like a crocodile, for example. Is it classified this way or is it classified that way? The reason why it's different is if it's a land animal, you have to slaughter it properly and make sure the blood comes out, which we're going to talk about today. But if it's a sea creature, you don't have to worry about it. It's perfectly fine for you to eat without slaughtering. So that's really the question. So there's a little bit debate. Anyone ever eaten crocodile? You eaten alligator before? Okay. You eat it regularly or just you tried it once? One-time thing. Yeah, okay. So you don't have to worry about it too much. If you ever decide you're going to eat it again, you just text me and I'll give you the detailed answer for it. Okay? Yeah. Okay, there you go. So that exactly. So there you go. So that's it. So sea creatures, the rest, everything else is perfectly fine in the sea. Moving on. These are examples. So insects, vermin, and reptiles. Okay? So when it comes to insects and vermin, they're allowed as long as they don't pose a health risk, right? So when it comes to things that you might find disgusting, like eating ants and cockroaches and grasshoppers and locusts and all of these things, they're allowed, even though many cultures, actually I put the word most, I wouldn't say most, because actually research shows 80% of the world's population eats in some way, eats vermin and insects and all of that. It's really the Western civilization, which we're a part of, that doesn't eat any of those at all, with the exception of the French. They eat, you know what they eat? Snails, escargot, right? I lived in France, that's why. So I didn't eat any snails though. But so here's something. Yeah, move on. Move on and stop here for a moment. So there's something that the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, they used to eat locusts, right? And a locust, you know, it's something which is, locusts come in giant swarms, right? And they come and there's a lot of them. So just so you know, none of the previous Muslims or something like that, they didn't used to eat cockroaches or anything like that, but they did eat locusts. And locusts are known in the Bible as well as in the Quran. It's in the story of Prophet Moses. If you remember, the locusts were one of the punishments that came on the people of Egypt and all of that. The locusts come in huge hordes and they just eat up the crops. So what happens is, when they eat up all the crops, what do you have left to eat? Yeah, you got the locust to eat, right? So this is what a locust looks like. This is fried locust from China, right? So for me, this is absolutely disgusting and I would never eat this, right? But if you're into that, you can go ahead and do that. So you're allowed to do that, and people, they look like giant grasshoppers kind of. And they come in literally in the hundreds of thousands, sometimes in the millions. into one area and just decimate the entire area by eating everything. So that's that. Dead animals. Okay, so dead animals refers to any non-sea creature, because we said sea creatures you don't have to slaughter them. Any non-sea creature like a bird or a land animal, if it dies without being slaughtered correctly, meaning without all the blood coming out and everything, it's called carrion, which means dead meat, and it is prohibited. You're not allowed to eat that in Islam. So it doesn't matter if the animal dies naturally, if the animal dies of an illness, somebody came and strangled the animal and killed it, if it died of a violent blow, like someone took a hammer and hit it, if it got wounded and it bled to death on the side, like its leg, and it just kept on bleeding, it doesn't matter how the animal died. If it died without being slaughtered, it's considered a dead animal, carrion, and it's completely forbidden in Islam. Now, why would this happen? Like, for example, you find, let's say, what we call roadkill on the street. Someone accidentally hits a deer and the impact killed it. You can't take that deer and eat it anymore. It's considered dead meat. Animal falls off a cliff, and this is very clear in the Quran. Animal falls off a cliff and it dies. You can't go up to it and say, okay, I'm going to cut it up real quick. It just died a minute ago. You can't take it anymore and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut it up and I'm going to, cook it, let's use its meat. You can't do that. If it dies of an illness, you can't do that. Many people in the past, the way that they used to actually kill animals is they used to either choke them, right? They used to literally choke them, like they'd take a chicken and they would like grab it, squeeze it until it can't breathe anymore, and it would die. Still, recently in the United Kingdom, it was still a procedure that the way that they would kill chicken, when you're getting your chicken, they would go and put the chicken, they would literally have a giant hammer and they would hammer it over its head and they would kill it, just smash its brain. And then afterwards, they would just cut off its head and they would start chopping it up. Now, the problem with all of these is, what happens when an animal dies this way? As soon as it dies, immediately when it dies, the blood starts to congeal. And it gets stuck inside the body. And eventually it starts getting mixed with the meat. So once you cut it up, you have a bunch of blood, the meat which is mixed with a bunch of the blood of the animal. And the blood is actually very unhealthy. It's considered something impure. We talked about in prayer, you wash the blood off of your body, you wash the blood off of your clothes. So blood is an impurity, scientifically as well as Islamically. So it's an impurity, and when that blood is stuck and congealed inside of the body of the animal, what's going to happen is it starts permeating in the meat. The reason why it's stuck is because the heart is not pumping the blood anymore, right, throughout the body. So even if you were to cut it and you start, like, say, okay, let's drain some of the blood out, it's not going to come out because it's not pumping, right, because it's already dead. So that's why dead animals are considered to be impermissible. And this is a major problem today, and I'll explain to you why. Sea creatures are exempt from this ruling, unless there's some health risk or something, because they don't function in the same way. The fact that they live in water is very different. The blood of a fish or the blood of a sea creature is very different than the blood of a land animal that doesn't live in the water. So they have two different things. That's why you find even illnesses. You can eat raw fish, for example. It's not going to really cause any issues. But eating raw meat of any other type of land animal or even a bird is a major issue, right? So because they're two different categories of things. So those are dead animals. Now, when it comes to dead animals, common question is, well, wait a minute. What if we're allowed to, what if a Muslim, okay, who's cutting the animal, what if a Muslim, this is not on blood, this is on the dead animal. So these are common questions. So let's say a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or someone, they actually killed the animal first, let's say through electrocution. Like it's very, very common in plants today. They shock a chicken and then they kill it afterwards, right? So are we allowed to, let's say 30 seconds later, are we allowed to eat that meat? No, we're not allowed to eat that meat. So the thing is, we have to be very careful in terms of how these factories process animals. If they're killing the animal first, it becomes very, very problematic because we're not allowed to eat that meat if we know that it's dying. So the regulations are, if you follow animal rights activists, they literally have to go into factories animal factories and factory farms and all of that, and they have to take undercover cameras to expose some of this that's happening. Why? Because it's not transparent, and they hide a lot of these things. Animals that are sick, animals that are about to die, they end up getting mistreated and all of that. You find people going in with secret cameras like it's some kind of, you know, spy mission or something, because it's not very transparent, unfortunately, in our community. So we should be aware of that, and we should be careful. Does American law require that animals be alive when they are slaughtered? So is it an American law or not? Well, according to the meat industry's own statistics, every year millions of chickens, turkeys, pigs, and cows, they arrive at the slaughterhouse. They're either dead, or they're too sick, or they're too injured to even walk. So they're at the verge of pretty much dying. Now, what do you think a company would do that just ordered a ton of these animals, and now let's say there's no return policy? What do? You just either you throw it away and you lost money, or it just kind of, no one's watching, just kind of throw them into the thing. So it's something that we should be aware of and be a little bit active about. So dead animals are clearly forbidden in Islam, and you see the wisdom behind it. Right? Moving on to blood. So when it comes to blood, any blood that pours out of an animal after it's slaughtered, it's considered to be prohibited, right? But whatever little amount of blood that remains in the veins of the animal after it's been slaughtered, it mixes a little bit with the meat, it's considered overlooked, and it's exception to the rule. Like we said, you know, if you have a little bit of impurity on your body or a little bit on your clothes, a little bit is overlooked. The same thing, a little bit is overlooked. So for example, you'll always find people cooking some meat and you see some blood in the pot along with the meat, right? It's very, very common. But that blood that's there, it's the blood after the animal's been slaughtered. Almost all the blood of the body's come out, but that's just a little bit that remained and ends up being kind of a little bit mixed with the meat. You cook it well and the rest of it's gone. So that's considered an exception to the rule. But the blood that's come out is considered to be impure blood. Okay, so that's that. Now, what's the reason? What's the wisdom behind this? Probably it has something to do with the risk of disease. Blood contains a lot of uric acid, and it's very injurious to human health. So that could be one of the wisdoms. You know, if someone's bleeding, you want to be very careful. Diseases are spread through blood. So people are very cautious about not to approach someone who's bleeding or, you know, touch their blood or something like that. So the same thing might have applied. This could have been one of the wisdoms behind why it's prohibited in Islam. So question regarding blood. Common question is, what if you eat slightly cooked rare meat or raw meat which still has some of the blood in it? Now, if it's unhealthy for you, like people like to eat raw steaks, for example. Does anyone like raw steaks? Medium rare? Kind of somewhere along that, right? Some people like it really raw, right? Where there's even blood like literally on the plate, right? There are people who like that. I don't, but it's there. So if it's unhealthy for you, then obviously you should not be eating that in the first place. But if it's not unhealthy, that blood is considered overlooked because it was already slaughtered and everything else came out. So you're allowed to eat that rare steak or whatever it is. Okay, so that's on blood. Moving on to intoxicants. All right, intoxicants is a lot to talk about here. So anything which can realistically intoxicate a person in large amounts is prohibited even in small amounts. That's the key. Anything which intoxicates in a large amount is prohibited even in a small amount. Right? So this includes every single type of alcoholic beverage and every type of drug. Right? So whether it's marijuana or speed or heroin or cocaine, even though the intoxicating effects of marijuana are different than the intoxicating effects of alcohol and wine and brandy and liquor and all these different type of, you know, spirits and all that, there's a difference. But they're both considered intoxication, because intoxication, according to the Islamic definition, is that which impairs your thinking ability. Not necessarily your driving ability, but your ability to think normally the way that you would normally be functioning. So when people are high, for example, on marijuana, they're going to start laughing, right, at jokes which they would not have thought were funny before. Or they're going to look at someone's shirt and say, well, ha ha, and start laughing like crazy. But if they were not high, they would not have ever done the same thing. So their intellect has become impaired to an extent. Even though in some ways they can function correctly, some ways they can't function correctly. So this is prohibited in Islam. The reason why a small amount is prohibited, so why prohibit a small amount? Can you get drunk off of one sip of alcohol? You pretty much can. Let's say, especially if you're heavy, you're a little bit heavy set, there's no way pretty much you could ever get drunk off of one sip of alcohol, or even, let's say, a few teaspoons of alcohol or something. But the reason why it's prohibited is for the societal reason which we mentioned earlier. Right? So there's individual and then there's societal benefit. So this has a societal benefit as well. And also, it prevents a person from crossing the limit on an individual level. So it helps the society keep itself in check, and it helps the individual cross the limit themselves. Like, anyone seen the commercial for Lay's? What's the Lay's potato chips? What is the motto that they have? You can't just eat one. Same thing with alcohol. You can't just take one sip. You want to take a few more. So you end up going and doing more generally. I mean, this may not. Let's say 10% of people do it. 90% of people have self-control. The harm from the 10% is enough to prohibit this in society. All right. So that's why it's considered prohibited. Any drink which has begun to ferment, but it can't cause intoxication in large amounts, it's still allowed. So if something is fermented, but it cannot intoxicate you, if you drink a lot of it, then it's still allowed. So there's certain types of teas which they're fermented. Certain types of drinks which are slightly fermented as well, as long as it cannot intoxicate in a large amount. So what does a large amount mean? A large amount means that you would have to drink enough of that. You would not be able to drink that much. Your stomach could not even contain that much before you got intoxicated. All right? So like literally, you could drink like 5 bottles. Let's say you can't drink more than 5 bottles of tea, right? And that tea, in order to intoxicate you, you would have to drink 10 bottles. So you would literally, your stomach would explode, or you'd die, or something. You'd throw up or something before you got intoxicated. That's allowed, even though it's fermented to a level. So we're going to see how that comes into play. So what is alcohol? All right, is alcohol prohibited, or are the intoxicants prohibited? Well, alcohol, from a chemical perspective, is simply something which has the hydroxyl compound in hydroxyl group. So if you studied your chemistry, anything which has an O and an H, has oxygen and a hydrogen molecule. OH is a hydroxyl molecule. Anything which has a hydroxyl molecule is considered to be an alcohol from a chemical perspective. Right? So let me give you some examples. And this is found in nature. You find alcohol in fruits. You find alcohol in so many things which exist in nature. So Islam does not prohibit alcohol per se. And this is a very common misconception among Muslims. So that every time you see some food and it has like, oh, look, this has alcohol in it. It's just some kind of alcohol, or chocolate liquor, or this or that. They think, oh, look, that must be forbidden for us. But it's not. Alcohol means anything which can intoxicate you. So it's intoxicants which are forbidden, not the alcohol itself. So let's take an example. Sorbitol, xylitol, and glycerin. They're all alcohols. But if you find out that sorbitol is in your food, and it's commonly there, that doesn't mean that it's prohibited, because these alcohols cannot even intoxicate you at all. They don't cause intoxication. Right? So the fact that they're alcohols doesn't mean that they're forbidden in Islam, because they can't intoxicate. All right, so hopefully that part is clear. Now, most liquid intoxicants such as beer, wine, whiskey, brandy, vodka, all of those things, they cause intoxication because of one type of alcohol which is in them. Does anyone know what that is? Who said it? Ethanol. Right? Ethyl alcohol, which is called ethanol. So it's the ethanol in these drinks which causes the intoxication. It's one type of alcohol which really ends up causing the intoxication for the most part. So how do you determine whether something is allowed or not allowed? The way you determine it is that each food and each beverage, it should be taken as a whole, not as its parts, but it should be taken as a whole, So let's say there's a quantity of ethyl alcohol mixed with the product. Let's say mustard, right? Mustard with white wine, very common, right? Dijon mustard, which has white wine. I went to school in a place next to the city of Dijon where they produce that mustard, world famous type of mustard, right? So is it prohibited or it's not prohibited? So what you do is you say, well, wait a minute. There's wine being mixed with my mustard, okay? And it's all mixed together. And inside the wine, there's something which causes intoxication, which is called what? Ethanol, right? So there's some ethanol in my mustard now, which has the ability to intoxicate me. Okay. Now, if I take a teaspoon of that mustard and I eat it, right? Or I take 2 teaspoons, will I get intoxicated? No. Now, is there a way I can eat enough of this mustard to get me intoxicated with the amount of ethanol that's there? Generally not. So you would end up throwing up or dying of mustard overdose before you get intoxicated. Therefore, this product would be allowed. But there's another one. There's a cake called rum cake, for example. Right? Rum cake is one of them. There's another type of cake, tiramisu, where I think they pour rum or brandy on top of it or something like that. So if you eat enough of this, right? If you eat enough of it and you can get intoxicated, it's considered to be forbidden. Like there's these little chocolate things. My friends, they were in Belgium, and it's very common. They accepted Islam, mashallah, and they were telling me, I went to a store one day and I saw that there's little chocolate balls with rum inside. And I said, you know what? They were asking me, well, we started staying away from that. I said, well, actually, what we learned, you can't really get intoxicated from that, because it's such a small amount. And they said, no, trust us. We weren't Muslim before. We used to come as little kids, 12-year-old or something like that, and we used to buy a bunch of these. And you eat enough of them, you start getting a little buzz. I said, oh, so that's when you know they're prohibited. So when you can eat enough of them and get a little bit intoxicated or start getting a little high or something, that's when it's considered to be prohibited. But if it's like mustard, which is mixed or something like that, there's no way you're going to get intoxicated off of it. You're allowed to go ahead and you can eat that, right? Like poppy seeds, for example. So there's poppy seeds on your, on your bread, on your muffins, right? Now, are you allowed to eat that muffin? Well, poppy seeds actually can potentially intoxicate you because that's where they make opium and heroin from poppy seeds. So would you be able to eat enough of those muffins to actually get you a little bit buzzed? You'd die of muffin overdose generally first before you started getting a little bit buzzed. If you do and you felt it, then you're not allowed to eat the muffins anymore. Even one. It doesn't mean you can't eat 5. You don't even eat 1. So you don't even get close to it. You don't buy it. You don't keep it in your pantry or anything like that. But as far as I know, you can't get like intoxicated off of poppy seed muffins unless anyone has done that.
No, but you can actually test positive.
Yeah, you can test positive. Yeah, you can test positive for it, but you can't actually get intoxicated off of it. Yeah. So that's the key. So just keep that in mind. Okay. So coming back to the but. So mustard, for example, the 2 of them are mixed. If the 2 of them are not mixed, such that they can be separated from each other. So the example that I was giving was the rum poured over the cake. Okay, so on many times it's not built into it. It's not mixed into the batter. But what it is you got a cake and they pour rum on top of it. And it's literally around the plate. That rum around it can be separated from the cake. You could just simply pour it off. So when it can be separated, it's considered as 2 separate products. So you're not allowed to eat that cake unless you cut out all the other portions which touch the alcohol and you leave that aside. So whenever you see a product which is mixed together, like mustard, it's considered one product and you decide, can this intoxicate you? When you're looking at rum cake as 2 separate products, you have to look at them individually. Otherwise, someone can say, you know what, I'm going to buy 10 pieces of rum cake, as an example. And you say, you know what, I'm just going to take 1 bite from each cake. And you take the 1 bite which has the rum on the side and you dip it a little bit and you dip it a little bit, what's going to end up happening? You'll get intoxicated a little bit. So that's just the general rule. No one would really do this, but I'm just explaining to you how you figure out the rule. So hopefully that's clear. All right. When you're buying something, when you're purchasing or you're owning certain substances which have the ability to intoxicate, it's important to differentiate between two types of products. That is an intoxicating substance like wine and a chemical like ethanol. So if you're buying ethanol, like rubbing alcohol, right, or certain types of alcohol which you use in your medicine cabinet, they have the same intoxicating effects. So are you allowed to buy that, or are you not allowed to buy that? Well, the first is permissible. The first is permissible to buy. You're allowed to buy ethanol. You're allowed to buy rubbing alcohol. You can have rubbing alcohol in your home for cuts and bruises and all of that stuff. But you can't buy wine as a Muslim. You're not supposed to even buy it. It should not even be in your house. Right? It should not be there at all. So even though you say, well, what about I'm making my own Dijon mustard and I'm going to add some wine. Well, if it's already there, that's one thing. You don't go and buy it and you don't have any of this stuff in your home, right? Because you stay away from it as much as you can. But if you're doing that, you're not allowed to buy one, you're allowed to buy the other. Why? Wine is produced for the purpose of intoxication. That's the reason why it's produced, right? Whereas ethanol or rubbing alcohol, for example, it's produced as a chemical. It's used for other purposes. It's not used mainly for intoxication. So even though it has the potential for that, it's almost never used for that, except during the prohibition in the 20s in America, when alcohol was prohibited and people started drinking other stuff, and then they started dying and all of that stuff. So intoxicants. So this is the difference. So understand that intoxicants are so bad. They're so bad. They're so prohibited in Islam. We're not allowed to drink them. We're not allowed to sell them. We're not allowed to even carry them for somebody else. Somebody says, hey man, can you hold my beer for me? I say, no, I can't hold your beer for you because I don't drink. I'm a Muslim and I don't have anything to do with this stuff at all. And you're not even allowed to serve them. Okay? So now that obviously becomes difficult when you're looking for a job or something like that. Something that you need to look out for when you're choosing your profession. But if you're not promoting or condoning the substance in any way, there's nothing wrong with being near it physically. So what that means is, if you're in a company meeting and they decide that they're going to be drinking next to you, are you allowed to sit at the same table or not? As long as you're clear cut that, you know what, I'm not drinking because I'm a Muslim and I don't do this, and no one's going to get the impression that you're sitting there on a table where people are drinking. If that's clear cut, you're allowed to sit at that table. It's not prohibited for you. Although many Muslims, they would like to stay as far away as they can from the alcohol. They would like to sit at another table. It's probably a better thing to do, but it's not clearly prohibited. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's intoxicants. All right. So common questions is, what if alcohol is in my food? Is it allowed? We already talked about. If it can intoxicate, it's not allowed. If it can intoxicate, then it's allowed. And you always look at the product as a whole. It's very important to look at the product as a whole, not as its parts. How about vanilla extract? Vanilla extract is 30% alcohol. Is it considered permissible? Right. So here's the question. So vanilla extract is used in a lot of ice creams, used in a lot of desserts and all of that, and it can potentially intoxicate you. So the question is this: if it's mixed into the food, is it permissible? Yes. Why? Because you can't eat so much ice cream that the vanilla extract is going to intoxicate you with its 30% alcohol. That's number one. Are you allowed to buy vanilla extract and keep it in your pantry? Yes. Why? Because no one uses vanilla extract to actually drink it and get high off of it. It's not like wine or something. It's used for cooking purposes. It was never produced in order to intoxicate in the first place. So it's allowed. Okay? If wine is cooked properly in food, I heard that it evaporates. Would it be okay to consume this food then? Well, according to the USDA alcohol burn-off chart, there's actually still a significant portion that's left, usually. So if it was intoxicating initially, but evaporates to the extent that it cannot intoxicate you anymore, then it's okay. But buying wine to use it in cooking in your own house or something like that, that's considered forbidden, and you should not do that. Okay? If you dilute alcohol such that it will not intoxicate anymore, is it automatically considered to be allowed now? And the answer is, why not? Let's say you diluted it to such an extent where you drink so much of it you cannot get intoxicated anymore. Now is it allowed? Why not? Okay, so this is a common misunderstanding of the hadith. There's two ways to understand it. So the rule is, if it was originally going to intoxicate you in small amounts or in large amounts, then it's not allowed in small amounts. But when do you apply the ruling? In its original form or in its current form? So you remember, you look at the product as a whole. It's very important to look at the product as a whole. So if you look at the product as a whole, if it has been diluted to such an extent and it cannot cause intoxication, then yes, it is permissible again to use, because it's not an intoxicating substance anymore. Even though it's because it goes back to ethanol within the beer is considered the part that intoxicates you. Yet if you take some ethanol and you throw it into, you take 1 drop of ethanol and you throw it into fruit juice, right? And you have this giant container of fruit juice. You drink the whole thing, you cannot get intoxicated by it. So the fact that the ethanol was mixed in there, because it's mixed, it can't be separated. You look at it as a whole, and now you apply the ruling. This thing in large amount can never intoxicate me. Therefore, it's allowed for me to drink it. So that's important. I'm glad we covered that question. Likewise, if you take alcohol and it ferments more, you take wine and you ferment it, it turns into, what happens when it ferments? It turns into vinegar. So is that vinegar that's produced from the wine allowed? Yes, because it doesn't intoxicate you anymore. Okay? Nutmeg. Can nutmeg intoxicate you? Yes, nutmeg can intoxicate you. But it will generally require you to eat so much nutmeg that you're going to get sick and you're going to start throwing up, and you're going to really be sick to your stomach before you even get a little bit of intoxication. Therefore, since it's not produced for that purpose and it's really not going to get you intoxicated before you get sick, you're pretty much sick and intoxicated at the same time. It's considered allowed to use nutmeg in your cooking and all that, even though I believe Saudi Arabia banned nutmeg, which is interesting. Okay, so that's it on intoxicants. Moving forward, harmful substances. Harmful substances, any animal which consumes foul food, which such that its milk or its meat becomes harmful or impure, it is disliked to eat that animal, depending on the amount of harm that it can have on your body. So certain animals, for example, today, what do they feed animals? They feed them oftentimes junk, absolute junk, and it turns out giving, mad cow's disease and, all of these other, illnesses and everything. So if that animal which is consuming some type of bad food or something, and it's traceable, you can see the effects on the animal, it's disliked to eat it. It's not prohibited, but it's disliked at minimum to eat it. Any substance, now here comes the big hitter. Any substance which contains almost no benefit but results in great harm is prohibited, such as cigarettes and hookah, and any other thing which is shown to have clear problem, like clear health benefits. But any excessive use of a substance that may not cause harm in a small amount, it's only prohibited when it's used in a large amount, like caffeine, for example. So it's common to say that, well, how can you say cigarettes are prohibited? Caffeine is just as deadly or just as bad for your body as a cigarette, for example. But there's a difference. So cigarettes, even on a small level, have a major harm to your body due to all the chemicals and all of that. Whereas caffeine doesn't cause the same harm to your body unless you're using it in large amounts. So there's a difference between one which is causing harm in small amounts and one which is going to cause harm in large amounts. So yeah, everything causes harm in large amounts. If you eat too much chocolate in large amounts, it's going to cause your body harm. Doesn't mean that it's prohibited. So when it comes to cigarettes and hookah, you do find a lot of Muslim scholars, they're saying that it's not prohibited. They're saying that it's strongly disliked, the category of makruh. And the reason why they're saying that is because cigarettes and hookah, tobacco has been around in the Muslim community for hundreds of years. Right? Ottoman Empire was talking about tobacco and all of that. At that time, Muslim scholars were analyzing the effects of smoking and tobacco and everything, and their understanding was that it emits a really foul smell. So when you go into the masjid or you meet other people, it ends up people just disliking it. So therefore they issued a ruling which says it's extremely disliked to use these products because other people are harmed by it. But they didn't know the health effects that we know today. And they didn't have the chemicals that they have today. So what happens is, many Muslim scholars, when they're asked a question about this, what they did was, they went back to the books of their teachers and their teachers' teachers. So, well, what did they say about cigarettes? Oh, look, they said it's strongly disliked, but they didn't say it's prohibited. They said it's disliked. So they went and said, okay, well, that's what my teacher said, then I'm going to go ahead and take the same ruling. But now it's clear cut, it's been proven that cigarettes and hookah are both extremely harmful for you. And it was thought that hookah was less harmful because it has a water filter and because it doesn't have as many chemicals in it. But recent research has shown that it's just as harmful as cigarettes are. So it's very important we understand that they're considered prohibited as long as it's understood that they have a clear harm and almost no benefit that's there. Unless you can find that one small hookah which has no tobacco in it, which is very, very rare to find. But there's a children's hookah that they have in Saudi Arabia which has zero tobacco, it's just flavor, right? So it tastes kind of weird. I tried it myself, it's just for kids. That one would be fine, but anything else is problematic. Now when it comes to vapor cigarettes, right, so that's the question, does it have the same harmful effects or something? There's new research coming out every day. What are the effects of vapor cigarettes? What are the effects? As a substitute, as a way of quitting, it's definitely a good thing if it's going to help you to actually quit. So it's a good way. If you're smoking already, it's great as a transition step. Whether or not it's causing the harm or something, I don't think it's clear cut right now until the research is going to show after 5 years, after 10 years, what is the real effect of this nicotine on the body and all of that. So it's best to avoid, but if someone's addicted and they're transitioning, I recommend that if this is helping you transition, use it to transition. But I don't think Muslims should go and start smoking vapes, you know, because it starts imitating and starts giving the feel like I want to smoke something else or something. It's best to avoid that. So that's harmful substances. Moving on, transformation and dilution. Anything that's prohibited, if it undergoes a complete transformation into another substance, like naturally or you add some chemical to it, it becomes permissible again. So giving you the example, if wine ferments and turns into vinegar, it was originally not lawful, but now it's lawful, right? Because now it's vinegar and it does not intoxicate anymore. If a plant, for example, is watered with sewage, sewage is impure, right? The fruit that comes out of that plant is still considered to be pure because now it's changed into a fruit, even unless there's some clear cut, you know, something, the fruit comes out black or something like that, or something weird like that. When there's a forbidden substance, such as a food additive, right? Let's say it's made from pig, like we talked about gelatin, and it mixes with another substance such that the ratio of the forbidden substance to the lawful substance becomes extremely small. Let's say like 0.01%. The difference between this and that mixed together, it becomes that small. So food additives are a very minute quantity, right? If that's the case, then it's recommended to avoid it, but it's actually allowed and permissible to eat it. So the most common example is what's called rennet. So rennet is a substance that's used in making cheese. And sometimes the rennet comes from pork instead of just beef products or somewhere else. So if a rennet comes from pork and you apply this principle, which quite a few scholars accept this principle, it's not agreed upon, but they say the amount of porcine rennet, or the amount of pork that's actually in the entire product, or the rennet product, is like 0.0001% or something like that. Very, very minuscule. So in that case, it's considered to be allowed to consume. However, as Muslims, we should search for alternative if alternatives exist. So we don't have to buy the cheesy Doritos all the time, right? We could buy a different brand of chips which does not have rennet, although or doesn't have pork rennet. And many people are switching away from pork rennet anyways. They're moving to beef rennet or this type of rennet or whatever it is. So just something to keep your mind open to. Okay. Moving on. Exception of necessity. Exception of necessity is that if someone is starving, they're dying of thirst, there's no other food or drink available. Is it allowed? It is allowed for you to eat or drink as much as you need in order to survive, and there is no sin on you. So if you're literally, leave it on there, if you're literally starving, you got nothing, and all you got is some bacon there, right? You're allowed to go ahead and eat it, just enough that you need in order to survive, and you're going to find some city or something like that, and you're going to be fine. If let's say there's alcohol or whatever it is, you absolutely need it to survive, you're allowed to go ahead and do that. Or someone's forcing you at the point of torturing you, and you have to eat it. You're allowed to eat it, there's no sin on you. If there's a certain type of medicine, and the medicine contains an ingredient which is prohibited for you, right? Like let's say there's urine inside the medicine, or there's pork gelatin inside the medicine, or there's ethanol, for example. It's allowed for a person to take it if there's three conditions are met. So it's very important, three conditions. Number one, there is no alternative medicine available. Number two, the illness is seriously disrupting your normal life function. And number three, it is relatively certain that it's going to work. It's not some experimental medicine that may be a shot in the dark or something. So that's when it's allowed, if it has an impermissible ingredient involved in there. Okay. Okay. Going back to impure substances. Okay. Let's just go back to impure substances real quick. Common questions. Many slaughterhouses dunk chickens into hot water after they're slaughtered to help remove the feathers. Right? Is this allowed? Right? Well, as long as the blood has poured out of the animal, it's not considered impure anymore. So you can go ahead and do that. So what their concern is, if you dunk a chicken after it's slaughtered into boiling hot water, the blood that was coming out is going to start mixing, or the impurity in the water is going to start mixing with the meat. So that's the issue, but it's not an issue. It's allowed. So we talked about things which are impure already, right? So we talked about blood, feces, vomit, urine, pus. You have to clean off of your body and all of that stuff, right? So one of the very common questions among our generation is it permissible to swallow during oral sex? Okay, because we talked about semen being considered an impurity as well. So the answer is no. We shouldn't be swallowing because it's considered an impurity in Islam, so you shouldn't. All right, moving to harmful substances. Transformation and dilution. Common question is, soap that's made from pig fat. A lot of soap is made from, has lard in it. So is that considered permissible or not? The answer is yes, because it's undergone transformation. So when you boil the soap, it's actually changed its form, so it's considered to have undergone transformation, so it's fine. Does the fat of a prohibited animal transform into a different product if it's heated or boiled? The answer is no. Just because you boil something doesn't mean that it's transformed into something else. It actually has to undergo some kind of chemical change, chemical process. NASA is producing a machine, I think they've produced it already now, where astronauts will urinate into a machine and recycle their urine, and they'll drink it again to help them do that. Is that going to be considered okay? The answer is yes. And why? Chemical change, transformation. It's gone through transformation, and therefore it's allowed. Okay. Moving on. Exception of necessity. Drinking medicine which contains alcohol, right? 2%, 5%, 10% alcohol. Again, it depends if you need that medicine, and it falls under the three categories. So if you got these three categories, you go with it. Some people say when you drink NyQuil, when you go to sleep or something, it gives you a little buzz. You drink a little bit extra, you do start getting a little bit. So if there's an alternative medicine, you go with the alternative medicine available for you. Okay. Otherwise, if you meet all the three requirements, it's fine. Okay, this is a question I saw on the internet. Someone says, When can I consume unlawful food? I'm a student, and all I find around me is meat which has not been slaughtered correctly, and it's so difficult for me. It's like I'm almost starving. So can I go ahead and use the exception that I'm starving and I can go ahead and eat that meat? Okay. No, because even though you're used to eating a lot of meat, there's so much non-meat food that exists in the world. You can just eat non-meat food and you'll survive. So you're not literally like dying, right? Literally, one guy, he gave this long, detailed, I'm literally every day I can't focus in school and I can't do this and I can't do that. There's so many different types of food that you can eat. So keep that in mind. Are tranquilizers such as Valium and Xanax allowed? What about taking morphine for intense pain? Because it definitely does intoxicate you. As long as it fits these three conditions, it will be allowed. If it's not in these three conditions and there's an alternative available that works, you have to go with the alternative. All right, moving on. Animal slaughter. There's a specific way which Islam has prescribed that you slaughter an animal before eating it. Right? Some of the aspects of slaughter are requirements. Some of them are requirements. You absolutely have to do them in order for the meat to be permissible, and some of them are recommended. Okay? So the slaughtering of animals is the one exception to the rule where we should assume that everything, we always said everything is considered to be permissible unless yes, the default position is that everything is allowed for you, right? When it comes to the animal, it's the opposite. And the reason why it's the opposite is the animal itself, while it's alive, it's in the category of permissibility. So are we allowed to eat cows in Islam? Yes, of course we're allowed to eat cows. Are we allowed to eat buffalo? Yes, we're allowed to eat buffalo. But the question is, there are certain requirements that the buffalo or the cow needs to be slaughtered in a certain way or killed in a certain way. So if you say, well, wait a minute, that buffalo, it fell off a hill and it died, right? So, but someone comes and says, but buffalo is allowed in Islam, so we can eat the buffalo. Your response would be what? It wasn't slaughtered, right? So we talked about the dead animals. So it's a dead animal, therefore it's not allowed. So well maybe while it was falling, right, maybe someone was holding out a knife or something like that, and somehow it got slaughtered, right, or something like that. You say, that maybe part, now where's the certainty, right? It's all about certainty and probability and doubt. So we go back to that thing we learned last week about probability and doubt. It's most probable that it died, right? It died without being slaughtered correctly, therefore it's considered to be not permissible for us to eat. So that's the thing to keep in mind. So how does that work? So the probability is, if you're at a Muslim's house, this is very common. If you're at a Muslim's house, okay, and they're serving food, and you know that they're practicing Muslims, and they obviously bring meat which has been slaughtered correctly, you don't have to ask them. You assume that they have had proper slaughtered meat, and you're allowed to eat that, because the doubt is maybe they didn't slaughter, but it's most probable if they're practicing, you know that they actually, they normally, buy properly slaughtered meat, you're allowed to eat that. But if you go to, let's say, a non-Muslim's house, the general standard is that they're not going to be buying that kind of meat, right? So you have to go and you have to check and you have to ask, okay? So, okay. So there's two types of animals when it comes to slaughtering. There are tame and domesticated animals, like cows, goats, sheep, all of that. They're domesticated in the sense that you keep them on the farm, you raise them. They're not wild animals. They're not, running around all over the place, right? So there are certain conditions. The first condition, which is clear cut, okay, is that the slaughterer must be a Muslim, a Jew, or a Christian, nobody else. Okay, the person who's slaughtering it, they have to be one of these faiths. They cannot be Buddhist, they cannot be Hindu, they cannot be atheist, they cannot be agnostic. They cannot be, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out what I am. They have to be one of these faiths. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, a sharp instrument has to be used. And in fact, it's recommended that the knife be really, really sharp so that you cause less pain to the animal when you're actually cutting the animal. But a sharp instrument has to be used, so meaning you're not allowed to use a hammer or some, dull blade or something like that. Number 3, the slaughterer must mention the name of Allah by saying Bismillah or Allahu Akbar or something like that. If it's a Jew or a Christian that's doing the slaughtering, they may mention the name of God in any way that's appropriate in their religion, and this purifies the act of sacrifice by mentioning that God, is like, this animal is there, God created it, and I'm taking its life because this is something that God allowed us to eat these animals. Otherwise, someone will say, well, this is murder or something like that. So just so that you know, this is according to the majority of scholars, right? According to Imam Shafi'i, one of the scholars, he says that saying the name of Allah when you're slaughtering is recommended rather than required. It's a recommended action, right? Which causes a big difference in understanding among Muslims, because they say, well, technically, if a Christian or a Jew is doing the slaughter and they don't mention the name of God, then for Imam Shafi'i it's fine. For the other ones, it's not. So that's why you find a little bit difference of opinion here. Okay. If someone accidentally forgets to mention the name of Allah while they're slaughtering, it's overlooked. So if they accidentally forgot, it actually happened to me one time. I'll give you the example. One time I was cutting and I was literally so excited. I had not slaughtered an animal in years. I got so excited and I was focusing so much. I want to make sure the animal feels no pain at all. So I'm focusing on the cut. And I go and they say, okay, now go. I went, totally forgot. Says, did you say it? No, I forgot, totally forgot. You could say it after, but I totally forgot, but it's still considered overlooked. As long as you had the intention, you were saying it, but you forgot. But if you intentionally skip it, you say, I don't need to say it, I don't want to say it, I don't care about what I do, this is my job, I'm a slaughterer, but I don't want to do it, it's not lawful. So you can't intentionally overlook it. And lastly, the slaughterer must cut between the throat of the animal and the upper bone of the chest. So it has to be here. You can't go and say, okay, I'm going to slaughter the animal, and you cut its thigh and let it bleed to death or something like that. You have to slaughter at the right place, okay? And this has 4 places. Okay, there are 4 places to cut. There's 2 jugular veins, what they call arteries, that are there. There's an esophagus, which is the food passage, and there's the trachea, which is the air passage. So this is what the animals generally have. They have 4 parts, right? So what your job is to do is to make sure that you at least cut the majority of these 4 parts. So as long as you're at 2.1%, you've cut at least more than 2 of these 4 parts, it's considered okay. If you just go and you stab the animal, this is becoming very common practice in America, where they stab the animal, and understand why would they do this? They stab cows, all right, because they don't want to puncture the jugular veins so much, right? So you puncture the esophagus, you puncture the trachea, and what's going to happen? The animal will die, but the blood's not going to come out as much. Now, why do you think a corporation would want to do this? Because they sell their animals by weight. The more blood that's left inside the animal, the more money you get for it. That's for them. Hey, we're sell some blood, it's better. But what ends up for the consumer is we're eating meat with more blood in it. It's obviously very problematic, right? So you have to make sure to at least get the majority of them at minimum, but the ideal is to get all 4. Meaning to do the slaughtering properly and get all 4. You can't really watch it, right? But minimum is the majority. That's like the bare minimum. So 4, it has to be majority out of 4, which is 3. Right? Or if you at least split the other one. So you have to get at least you got to get one of the jugular veins. So minimum is get majority, 3 out of 4, right? And it's disliked for you to cut beyond that into the spinal cord or to cut off the entire head. So you don't just go and chop off the entire head. You see it in videos and stuff, right? They take a chicken, they just chop off the head or something. That's not Islamic practice. Islamic practice is to actually make sure to cut these veins, these 4 parts, but not to cut off the entire head. And there's a reason for that too. The reason for that is one of the main reasons is if you cut the spinal cord, you cut off the entire head. The spinal cord is the one that's registering the sensations to the rest of the body. The goal of cutting this is what? Is to, 1, get the animal to go into like shock so that it doesn't feel pain. Number two, to get the blood out while the heart is still pumping. So the blood will actually be coming out even faster. What happens is when you sever the spinal cord, it's not able to communicate that information, so the blood is not going to be coming out, and the animal is going to go into a different type of shock where it's not going to actually get the blood out of the animal. So it's not good for the animal, and it's not good for the consumer who's going to be eating the meat. All right, so that's a requirement, and this is clear cut. This is agreed upon by all scholars. The only difference of opinion here is Imam Shafi'i on point number 3. Everything else is clear cut. However, there are animals which have long necks, like camels, ostrich, giraffes, ducks, geese, all of these things. These animals, because of their long neck, it's actually easier to stab the animal, but not stab them like they're doing today in the meat industry. To stab them properly so that you get the same veins. You stab them with a proper knife or spear or something like that. It's recommended to do that above the chest, right, but at the base of the neck, below, so that you get the windpipe and you get the gullet, but it's closer to the body of the animal. So it's easier than cutting the throat, and it actually helps the animal to die faster. So it's better. So less pain to the animal, and it's easier for the person. They don't imagine you had to slaughter a giraffe. You really got to climb up there. You got to get on the top. So you go and get it at the base of the neck, right? And that's how camels are stabbed. Closer to the chest, but it's still, you still get those veins. It has to be above the chest, but doesn't have to be at the top of the neck. Okay. Yes. We take questions at the end, but I'll make an exception for you. Not always. Not when it comes to long animals. It's like a camel or something like that. Not necessarily. You stab it while it's standing still, and then it falls down. Because if you put it down, camel is such a big thing. When you lay it down on the floor, it takes a long time before you get it down. It's gonna understand something's happening to it, right? So it's more problematic. Okay, hunting. So this laptop. It's coming back. So we said all the rules for land animals, or these animals, are for animals which are domesticated. Right? Domesticated, tame, trained animals. Right? Okay, we just lost the screen here too. Okay. All right. But what about wild animals? Now imagine you had to go and take a wild animal and actually hunt it. Like go and slaughter it. Very difficult. Okay, like let's say, okay, you know what? We said you're allowed to eat doves, right, as birds. Okay, go try and slaughter a dove. Good luck. Right? How are you gonna get the bird down, right? How are you gonna? It's not an easy thing. So there are wild animals which are not domesticated. They're very difficult to be slaughtered. So they have to be hunted first, right? So in this case, there's an exception to the rule. This is a concession. So you have to understand it's a concession. Like for example, when you don't have water, you're allowed to do what to make your wudu? Tayammum, right? When your back is hurting, you're allowed to do what? Sit down, right? So this is an exception to make our life easier for us. Because if we had to go and slaughter all those animals which are wild animals, make life very, very difficult for us. So the concession is hunting. So animals which are wild, you can hunt them and you're allowed to hunt them. So the concession is you can actually kill them by wounding any part of their body such that they die from the blood loss. So you can shoot them with the bullet, with the arrow, whatever it is. This is the exception to the rule. But if you have a domesticated animal, you can't apply the rules of hunting and say, you know what, oh, I'm hunting that cow right there. And you go and you shoot it in the leg. Right? But if it's a wild animal and you're hunting it, you're not going to get it in the neck, right? You're going to get it in a certain part and it's going to end up bleeding to death. So here are the rules that apply when it comes to hunting. Number one, you have to use an instrument or a weapon that punctures the body of the prey so that it causes it to bleed to death. So it has to bleed to death. Meaning you don't, let's say you shoot a BB gun at it, bunch of metal pellets. It's not gonna penetrate it. It's probably, you'll kill the animal if you have enough BBs being shot, right? What's gonna happen? These are round metal balls. You're shooting at it. It's gonna die of the impact, not of bleeding. So that's not allowed, right? And the reason why this is so important, because in the past they used to use arrows, right? Bow and arrow. And sometimes if you don't sharpen your arrow, or if you use a dull arrow with no tip, it will kill the animal, but it's not going to puncture the animal. So the blood is not coming out. It'll die from the blow. And dying from a blow is very similar to dying from fall, which is not allowed, and that becomes a dead animal. So you have to hunt properly, right? So you can use a bullet, you can use an arrow. You're also allowed to use a trained hunting dog or any other animal which is trained. It knows what to do. So hunting dog goes, and these dogs, they go and they bite the animal. And when they bite it, they actually puncture the animal. It starts bleeding, and the animal will bleed to death. And it's your dog, you trained it, you know what it's doing. And lastly, a trained hunting bird. So if you have a hunting bird, the falcon, for example, can actually go and catch other animals for you if it's trained well. And you're allowed to utilize those birds. So you're allowed to use anything that's going to be there for your hunting purposes, right? Does anyone have a hunting dog or knows how to use a hunting dog? No. Hunting falcon ever? No? Okay. All right, that's fine. Pronounce the name of Allah before firing or sending the predator off. Now, this is a requirement. This is a requirement. I don't know what Imam Shafi'i said, but this is generally a requirement. So before you shoot that gun, you got to say the name of Allah. Right? Likewise the Jew, likewise the Christian. Before you send your dog, you have to say Bismillah, and then you send the dog over. Right? So that's important. If the game is wounded and it dies, it is lawful to eat that animal. But if you reach the animal and it's still alive from its wound and it's dying, it's a requirement now for you to slaughter the animal. So what you basically do is when you're hunting, you gotta keep a knife with you. So if you shoot down a bird or something and you run over there, or you shoot, whatever other animal you're hunting, let's say wild cows or something like that, and you shoot it, and then you get to it and you run over there, you finally find where it was, and then all of a sudden it's still breathing, it's still alive. You gotta take out your knife and you gotta do the proper slaughter. Okay? Anyone hunt at all? You hunt? All right, so now you're gonna keep your knife with you. Long time ago. Hunting squirrel. Okay. Okay. So you're gonna take your knife with you and you're gonna make sure you slaughter it. Otherwise, it won't be permissible. All right. So that's meat. Moving on, prohibited vessels, and then we'll take a break after this. So another topic is what vessels, utensils are we not allowed to use in Islam? Anything which is made of gold or silver is prohibited in Islam because it's considered to be a universal sign of extravagance and arrogance, using like gold. Why would you have to use a gold cup, for example? Like certain kings and stuff like that, they use golden cups. They only drink out of the golden cup, something like that. This is considered a sign of extravagance. We have to be humble. There's no need to spend so much money on those things. And that's it. That's the only prohibited utensils that are there. Regarding prohibited utensils, I'll come back to animal slaughter. No. We'll come back to it later. Yeah, that's it. Prohibited vessels. Yeah, if it's solid gold, right, or silver, so if it's solid, fully made of silver, then yeah, you should not be using it. But if it's coated or something like that, if it's gold plated, best to avoid anyways. If it's silver plated because of the quality of it, then it's okay. Okay. Moving on, eating manners. What are some of the manners that we have when we're eating? You wash your hands before eating. Obviously, it's important. You say Bismillah before eating. Right? So we covered this in another class. If you took that class, you say Bismillah or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You start in the name of Allah every time before you eat. And when you're done, or if you forget to say this, you say Bismillah fi awwalihi wa akhirihi, which means Bismillah at the beginning and at the end, because you forgot. So even if you're in the middle of the meal and you totally forgot in the beginning, this is what you say. Bismillah fi awwalihi wa akhiri, which means Bismillah at the beginning and at the end. You use your right hand to eat. So whenever you're eating something with one hand, use your right hand. If you need both hands, like picking up a burger, you can use both hands. But you always focus on the right hand. Why do you think that is? What do you do with your left hand? That's right. You clean yourself in the bathroom with your left hand. You clean your nose with your left hand. Right. So you use your right hand whenever you're eating. And if it just takes a little time, you get used to it after a while. So even if you're drinking your soup, use your right hand. If you're picking up something, use your right hand. Picking up a slice of pizza, use your right hand. If you need your left hand for support or something, that's fine. But it's a very characteristic of Muslims that they use their right hand to eat. Doesn't matter if you're right or left-handed. You can just make the adjustment. Don't move your hand around the plate. Okay, what that means is if you're eating out of a shared platter, right? It used to be very common in the past. People would eat together. Let's say you're with your friends and you get like a pizza. You're all eating from the platter directly. It's Islamic etiquette that you don't move your hand around the plate. This is all of this is from the Prophet's direct teachings, right? So he said, don't move your hand around the plate. What that means is that you're going and you're picking from other person, like you eat the food that's in front of you. So you don't go and say, oh, well, look, we have this giant thing of rice and meat. But you know what? I got this drumstick part, and I like the wing, right? But the wing is in front of that guy. So I'm going to go and eat from a little bit from here, and then I'm going to go and pick that wing over there. And you don't move your hand around unless the other people don't mind. So if the other people are literally, they don't mind at all. Let's say you're the guest of honor, and they made this platter for you. Oftentimes they insist that you go and you get whatever parts you want, otherwise they're not going to be happy. If they don't mind, then it's fine. Otherwise, it should not be done, because it's not fair to the other people. You steal all the meat from their place and you leave them with, I don't know, rice or something else. Eating from a common plate, like let's say pizza or something, is actually considered recommended, because it builds brotherhood and sisterhood, eating from a common platter. Unless one of them is sick or something. But eating from a common platter is a good thing, and it's a habit where we kind of lost this habit. Everyone just kind of eats separately. Everyone's got their little plate, little plate, little plate. It's actually nicer if everyone eats together. It builds that bond among people, especially among families at least. The family should at least eat together from a common plate. It's a good habit, something that we should try and revive whenever we get a chance to do so. No, many Arab cultures, many Indian, Pakistani cultures, they still do it. We tried to in the beginning last year in CIS as well. We used to order lunch on Sundays, and we tried as much as we could. Sometimes when we had a chance, we would try and have a joint platter or something, or at least eat together on the ground together or something like that. It's a good practice. So we should try to do that, bring that back, as long as they actually respect the not moving the hand around the plate part. So you got to teach them both at the same time. Don't criticize food. So never criticize the food itself, right? You can like food and not like food, but you don't have to blame the food and think the food is bad or something like that. Otherwise, we'd be criticizing locusts, right? Because none of us wanted to eat that picture from that picture. But clean your plate and clean your fingers when you're done. Wash your hands after you're done. Don't belch out loud and annoy other people. And you make the dua after finishing the prayer. The dua is a supplication. So you say this when you're done. You say, Alhamdulillahi allazi at'amana or at'amani, either me or I, at'amana wa saqana wa ja'alana muslimin. Or if you don't memorize that, or it's in the meantime, you just say Alhamdulillah at the end. And Alhamdulillah means praise be to Allah. Why are you thanking Allah? You just say Alhamdulillah because He's the one who gave you this food to eat. There are so many people in the world that don't have food to eat today. So it's important that we remember we begin by saying Bismillah and we end by saying Alhamdulillah, by praising Allah. Right? When you're drinking, you drink with 3 or more sips. So what that means is when you're actually drinking, you don't just, let's say you're really thirsty, you just take that bottle and you just gulp the whole thing down. This is not characteristic of a Muslim. We should take breaks, take a stop, just drink, stop for a moment, take a breather, drink again. At minimum, you should have 3 or more sips. You should not have Just when you're really thirsty, sometimes you could just take a 32-ounce Gatorade or something, just take the whole thing down. But that's not showing patience when it comes to food. So you can drink the whole thing, just drink it, just take a breather. Drink it again, take a breather, take a third one, you finish the entire thing. Just 3 breaths, or 2 breaks basically, so it becomes 3 sips in the end. And don't breathe in a shared vessel, right? So if you have a shared cup or something like that, you don't breathe into it. If it's your own vessel, it's okay. This is very common that people, there's a statement of the Prophet prohibiting this, that you don't breathe into a vessel. But he was referring to a shared vessel. So sometimes people, when they get their coffee or their tea, and it's really, really hot, and they start blowing into it, the Prophet prohibited that. You're not allowed to do that. That was referring to when you're sharing it with other people, because they wouldn't want you to breathe into their drink. Even if you can drink together, they don't feel comfortable that you're breathing into it. Even if you drink from it, it's one thing. If you breathe into it, it's a different thing. So if it's a shared vessel, don't breathe into it out of respect for the other person. But if it's your own thing, you can breathe into it and you can blow on it or cool it down or something like that. Sitting while drinking is recommended if there's no reason for not standing. Yeah, if there's no reason for, if there's no reason for stand. Basically what this means is, it's recommended whenever you get a chance to sit and drink. But if you stand up and drink, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Especially if there's a reason, right? So if you don't want to bend down, or if you bend down, it's you don't have the opportunity right now, or whatever it is, you're in a hurry or something, you can stand and drink. But if you ever get a chance, it's better to sit down and drink while you're sitting down. So let's try and get through dress and grooming today. The way that you dress, it's part of human nature to actually cover yourself, cover your nakedness and actually wear clothing. Something that's built into us. It's not some acquired trait over evolution or something like that in the Islamic perspective. It's also done for adornment purposes. So it's almost like food. You have to eat and it tastes good, so you enjoy it. So it's a blessing. Same thing, you have to cover yourself from cold weather and all of that, but it's also done as an adornment, as a way of decorating yourself and looking nice. So that's something that Allah has given us. But there are certain guidelines that teach us to take care of our body and make sure that we wear clothing which is considered suitable for the society in which we live. So let's start with grooming. So grooming, there's a few rules when it comes to grooming. A person, a Muslim, at minimum must take a bath at least every 7 days whenever they're available, whenever they're able to do so. So that's, they should not exceed 7 days without a bath. Now generally that's not an issue today, but it used to be in certain times perhaps in the world. So you should at least on Friday take a bath. But it's recommended obviously to do more than that and to clean yourself on a regular basis to make sure that you smell good and all of those things. It's also a requirement to trim, shave, or pluck your underarm and your pubic hair. All right, so first is about bathing, right? It's very important you take a bath at minimum once a week, otherwise more. Underarm and pubic hair must be trimmed or shaved or plucked. Which I would find that painful, but some people do that and they're used to that. And probably one of the wisdoms behind that is it helps build up, prevents the buildup of bacteria and all of these things. So underarms, this is for males and females, as well as the pubic regions, the pubic hair. All right, and the fingers and the toenails, fingernails and toenails, they should be cleaned and they should be trimmed as well to prevent dirt from building up underneath them. And this is an important part of Islam. So it should be done by everyone. It should not be skipped. And the maximum which you can leave your nails or your underarm or pubic hair is 40 days. And they have to be trimmed within 40 days. So it's actually sinful if you go beyond 40 days and you do not trim it or cut it or cut your nails. All right, to make sure that you don't get dirt build up and all of those things. Or at least, let's say for fingernails, at least cleaning it. Making sure it's completely clean, but you should be cutting it as well, at least trimming it at some stage within every 40 days. It's recommended if you do it every week, every 2 weeks or something. Friday is a good day to make sure to trim them, but it's a requirement to do that. For men, it's a requirement for them to grow their beard at some stage or some length, and to trim their mustache, right? Because that's the distinguishing mark of a believer. So the beard is there. The vast majority of scholars, they say a beard is a requirement in Islam. So you have to at least grow something. So what is the definition of a beard? It grows on your chin, the hair that grows on your jawbones. So you have to have some type of beard, some type of facial hair here. Doesn't have to be very long or anything, but as long as it's considered a beard, dictionary definition of what a beard is. The mustache must be trimmed before it starts growing over your lip, right? So that's to prevent when you're eating and food and all of that stuff. So that's something that needs to be done as well. So that's when it comes to men, okay? Men and women should not resemble each other in their grooming, meaning their hairstyle, their dress, whatever they do, they should not resemble each other. And of course, that's contextually conditional. It depends on the custom in which you live. So as long as, let's say, for example, a woman who's shaving her head, right? So if a woman is shaving her head, in many cultures, that's considered to be outside of their culture, right? That's males will shave their head, but women generally do not shave their head. So what is culture, by the way? Culture is not because, you know, Miley Cyrus decided to go and shave her head. Culture is when it's generally accepted as being the culture of the land. Right? So men and women should try to make sure that they look different and they don't resemble each other. So that's an important thing. There should be no imitation of the opposite gender. Of course, even though there's many, you know, movements today that want women to dress exactly like men, this is nothing to do with Islam. There's a difference between the two, and there should be a clear line of difference between the two of them. But of course, it's contextually, it's culturally different. So there may be a culture where, let's say in some random part of China or something, where the women dress like the way American men would dress, for example. And the men dress like women, or women dress like men, or something like that. It's dependent on their culture. As long as there's a line of differentiation between the two, it's considered to be fine. It's prohibited to permanently change the shape of your body or scar your body through a type of plastic surgery or by getting a tattoo, a permanent tattoo or something like that. That's considered permanently changing part of your body. So that's not allowed. But if you need surgery for correcting a deformity or bringing something that should have been, you know, normal, let's say there's something with your cheek or your lip or something like that, bring it back to what should have been normal or natural, then it's allowed. So corrective plastic surgery is fine. But plastic surgery, like, I don't know, what, cosmetic surgery, yeah, like all these Botox implants and all of these other things, such that you're changing your, you know, like breast implants or something like that, such that you're changing, you know, the way your body was normally going to be, that's considered prohibited in Islam. But let's say you had, let's say breast cancer or something, and something happened so that it's now your breast is deformed. Let's say it shrunk or something. So to augment your breasts to bring them back to what they were supposed to be is allowed. But to do it for simply cosmetic purposes, you know, put silicone in there, no. It's permitted to wear a wig. Okay, it's allowed for a woman to wear a wig or use hair extensions because you're not permanently changing your body. You could simply take it off, as long as you're not trying to deceive other people. Let's say you're trying to get married and you pretend you put a wig on and you're lying to the other person or something like that. Then it's fine. Also, it should not be made from human hair because human hair is considered to be the human being, parts of the human being are considered to have a special status in Islam. So it's made of anything else besides human hair, that would be fine. If a woman has lost her hair, then human hair may also be used as a wig because she's restoring it back to her natural state. So she doesn't want animal hair on her head. She's actually lost her hair due to, let's say, chemotherapy or something. She can actually get real human hair in that case because that's an exception to the rule. It's allowed to dye your hair any color. It's allowed to dye your beard any color, even to change gray hairs or something like that. So technically, as long as you don't look like a weirdo and it's not considered bad in society, you can you can dye your hair anything. So Sheikh Faqih and I, we actually thought about, you know, I was going to dye my hair blue, he was going to dye red, we're going to come and teach in the masjid. I'm just kidding. But you would be allowed to do that if it wasn't considered strange in the society, right? It depends on the culture you live in. So if I dyed my hair blue and if I gave the khutbah, it would still be considered strange, generally, right? So it depends where you are and depending on what culture you have. But if it was just like me and you and Jamil, and I'm giving the khutbah for you guys, I'd go with like a reddish blonde mix, something like that. That would be fine, all right? Oh, so okay, so Jamil would be kicked out of the khutbah. I would bring Kenny back in, you know. So someone else, someone who would not have a problem with it. All right, so you're allowed to do that. So that's grooming. Clothing. Moving on to clothing, it's important to wear modest clothing to prevent. So why wear modest clothing? To prevent unwanted advances. That's one of the reasons of wearing modest clothing. Wearing clothing or dressing in a way that resembles the opposite gender is prohibited, like I mentioned. Depends on local custom. So for example, wearing necklaces. A man wearing a necklace. There are some cultures, if a man wears a necklace, he's considered to be a girl in a culture. You're not, in that culture, you're not allowed to wear a necklace. Right? Wearing a bangle, for example, right, it's considered a feminine thing in many cultures. Right? Like say the Pakistani culture. If a guy comes and wears like silver bangles or something, it's gonna be weird, I'm assuming, right? You look like a girl or something. Even earrings. So earrings, in some, let's say, African cultures or something, men wear earrings and it's considered to be a manly thing. But there are other cultures where wearing an earring is considered a feminine thing. Therefore, it needs to be avoided. So our culture is kind of strange. In America, it's hard to define what culture is. Because in one group, it's one culture, in one group, it's another culture. It's very, very difficult. And they're debating back and forth among themselves. One of my friends, he was joining the Marines. And what happened was they were debating whether people in the army should be allowed, like if you have a piercing or a tattoo, you're not allowed to be promoted past general. And then they were reversing the rule because almost everyone was having a tattoo or an earring or something like that. Then they were debating, well, should we enforce this or should we not enforce this? So even everyone is struggling to figure out what is American culture, because it just changes so much all over the place. So it's kind of difficult. You know, you just got to try and figure it out, or sit down with someone and try and figure out what is the real culture. Okay, wearing any clothing or dressing in a way that's specific to disbelievers. Imitating disbelievers is also prohibited. Now, what does that mean, imitating a disbeliever? For example, if you dress like a priest, right? If you wear the little white thing or something like that, you wear that style of clothing, or you dress like a nun. So you wear your hijab, but you dress exactly like a nun. You wear black and white exactly in the same style that a nun would wear. So, well, I'm wearing the hijab, I'm dressing correctly like a Muslim, but you're imitating that nun, even if that's not your intention, but it's very clear that you're looking exactly like them. And that dress is exactly, you know, specific to that type of person and their religion. That's considered imitating a person of another religion. Or wearing a cross or something like that. We're not allowed to do that. So we are not allowed to do something that they're doing exactly. But if it's just neutral clothing that everyone wears, then that's fine. You could wear whatever. Leather. So leather is obviously made from animals. And we just talked about dead animals, which are not slaughtered correctly, are considered impure. So we're not allowed to eat them. So the question is, are we allowed to wear them? Right? So the thing is, the Prophet made it clear that if an animal dies, even if it's dead, it's carry on, you're not allowed to eat it. When you tan it and you make it into leather and you dry it out, all of that, whatever impurities, which was causing it to be impure, actually is gone. And now it's just considered leather, so it's considered pure, and you're allowed to utilize that. Many scholars exempted the pig. You say, what about pig leather? So most scholars said pig leather falls into the same prohibited category. Even if it's tanned, we should not be using pig leather. So what does that mean, not using pig leather? So it means that if you're going to go buy a jacket and it's made of pig leather, which is rare, but it exists, don't buy the pig leather jacket. Go and buy any other type of leather jacket. But if you're playing football, right, and you're using a football that's made of pig leather, you're simply touching it, but you're not wearing it or something like that, right? So are you allowed to touch that thing, let's say if you're playing football and it's a pigskin football, right? After you finish playing football, are you allowed to go and pray because you just touched something impure? You have to take a shower or something. Okay. Okay. Or at least do your wudu again or something. The answer is actually no, it's fine. Because it's, remember we said impurities only transfer if it's wet or somehow it's gonna be on your hand. Nothing transfers, no molecules actually transfer to your hand when you're touching a piece of leather, even if it's pig leather, because it's dried out completely. So there's nothing that's actually gonna be on your body. So it's remember the impurity, when we talk about like physical impurity, it's physical, so it's not spiritual. Alright, so it's not a spiritual thing, so there's nothing, no wudu needs to be made because there's actually nothing physical on your hand. So yeah, you definitely, yeah, you need a shower anyways when you're done generally, but just from the Islamic perspective. Let's see. And some scholars allowed pig as well. So there are some scholars who even said pig also, it's not an exception to the rule. If you tan it, it's allowed, the leather is fine too. Local customs should always be taken into consideration whenever you're determining what type of clothing is appropriate. So you have to understand the culture. For example, if a person drags their clothes on the ground, say the pants like are dragging on the floor, or let's say their pants are falling down below their ankles or something, that used to be considered a sign of extravagance in the time of the Prophet, in Arab culture and all of that. It's a very prideful thing to do. So in that case, you should avoid doing something like that where you're dragging your pants or something, because it's a sign of arrogance. Dragging your pants is usually it's like a sign of showing that look how cool I am. It's a sign of arrogance generally. Interestingly, sagging pants, does anyone know where it came from? You know, sagging your pants means it's lower. It's like falling down almost. Now it's like literally like almost like on the floor, and you're walking with your pants almost all the way down. Does anyone know where it came from? That's right, it came from the prison system, because they didn't have the belts, right? And they wanted to make, so they couldn't run away. They didn't give them belts, so they have to keep pulling their pants up, you know. And people got it from the prison system. Let's see. Okay, so that's that. Likewise, not covering one's head with a cap or a turban, it was seen disrespectful or unmanly in many communities. So still in many cultures, if you don't cover your head with a cap or something like that, it's considered to be disrespectful or something, you're doing something wrong. So if you're in that culture, you should wear a cap. If you walk into a masjid and you're in Pakistan and everyone's wearing a cap, and they actually offer you like little plastic caps there, that in case you forgot your cap, you can go put the cap on. You don't walk in there and say, oh, I don't care what you guys think, man, this is my culture, you know, I don't wear a cap. Just be respectful and you put the cap on. All right, so that's why Omar, mashallah, he thinks he's still in Pakistan. No, I'm just kidding. So he still wears the cap, alhamdulillah. Even in American culture, it was the same way, that wearing a cap was considered a sign of respect. And then you take off your cap for someone and all of that. You walk in a courtroom, even in a courtroom today, you have to take off your caps, right? Or something like this. Certain, you know, principles that people have. So these are all culturally based. You should take these customs into consideration when they exist, when they already exist. But when they don't exist, you don't need to change that culture in order to make it like the Arabian culture during the time of the Prophet. You don't need to like revive this culture that existed because it's not there anymore. Also, there's no specific prohibitions on colors or style of clothing that you can wear, as long as it fulfills the general requirements. So you could wear any type of color, you could wear any type of style of clothing with this, you know, this stitching and that stitching and all of that, as long as it fulfills the general requirements. So what are the general requirements for men and the general requirements for women? So the general requirements for men are required to cover from their navel to their knee whenever they're going to be in public. Okay, from their navel to the knee. This includes the knees, but doesn't include the navel. We already talked about the including the knees, including the navel. Same rules apply as before. The clothing must be opaque. Right? What does opaque mean? not see-through, not transparent. Okay, it must be opaque and it must be loose enough to not portray any body part that's supposed to be covered. So if men are supposed to cover between the navel and the knee, right, and they're wearing like spandex tight jeans or something that really tight, such that their rear end is like showing from the back, that's too tight because that's part is supposed to be covered. So if it almost looks like it's transparent, you know, like think of any superhero, right? This region is too tight. You see what I'm saying? So Superman, Batman, for some reason, I don't know why all these people have to wear the tightest clothing, but it's a little bit too tight in that region. Right? All the X-Men, pretty much everyone, even Spider-Man, I think, they're all in the same boat pretty much. It's too tight, right? So think about your role models and everything. It should be at least a little bit loose around this area that needs to be covered. So that's for men. Most men generally follow that. It's prohibited also for men to wear silk if it's directly touching their skin. Okay. So what does that mean? If it's directly touching their skin, are you allowed to wear a silk tie? Yes. Why? It's not directly touching your skin. It's over the shirt, right? So you're allowed to wear that. This is because it's considered. Why is silk prohibited? Because most probably it's considered to be effeminate and a luxurious material which is mainly meant for women to enjoy. So men have been taught to be a little bit more manly. They need to keep that thing in. So this is one of the things that are supposed to be there. A small amount of silk for men, such as like let's say a few inches of silk, is considered to be overlooked because it doesn't really represent clothing. So let's say I got my shirt and all of a sudden I had like a, let's say this little patch right here was made of silk. It's not, but let's say it was, right? This would be fine to wear because you don't, this is not really considered clothing, right? So if like a little piece of silk is somewhere on the thing for decoration, it's not really there because silk is admired for its like for its material, for its touch, how soft it is. When it's embroidered or something on a garment, you're not benefiting from that part of the silk anyway. So it's falling in a different category and it's a small amount. So it's okay. It's fine for men to use silk as a pillow, as a sheet, or even as a blanket. They're allowed to use that. They're just not allowed to wear it. So they can sleep on that because it's not considered clothing. Wearing silk when needed. So let's say you're in a sports competition and you got to wear silk. Let's say you're a cross-country runner and all the jerseys are made of silk because silk is a very light material. And you're wearing it for that purpose, you're wearing that jersey, you're allowed to wear silk in that case. Where else would you need silk? In a wedding? No. No. Men cannot wear silk in a wedding. Yeah, but it should not be made of silk. So their clothing should just be, wedding is not like a requirement. Wedding again becomes, that's for show purposes. We're talking about you're not wearing it for the show part of it. You're wearing it because it's a very important thing that you need. Like for example, in battle, Muslims started wearing silk under garments because it's very loose and you could put your armor on top of it and you can function very well with it. So they started wearing silk because it's light, you can fight better with it. So they were doing that, so that's allowed. It's also allowed to wear a fabric which is a mixture of silk and non-silk, as long as the majority is non-silk. So if you have 30% silk, 70% rayon, it's fine to wear that. All right, but if it's 60% silk, 40% polyester, avoid it. It's also prohibited for men to wear gold. Okay, so men are not allowed to wear gold. That applies to jewelry, those big giant wrapper chains and all of that. You're not allowed to wear that. Gold, bracelets, gold rings. This is a big problem because it keeps on happening. Many wives want their husbands to get a gold ring because they have a gold ring. Muslim men are not supposed to be wearing gold, including rings. So it's very important that they don't do that. It applies to jewelry. It applies to watches. So even you want to buy a Rolex, right, which it would have been better if you donated the money to the masjid. But if you want to buy a Rolex, right, don't buy a gold one. Right? Don't buy one which has gold. It was made of gold. However, if you have, or weapons, even weapons should not be made of gold. Right? That's used to be a sign of extravagance as well. But however, if a garment is woven with some gold, so let's say you have a garment and it's actually got some gold stitching or this gold in there, or you have a gold plated item, it's not prohibited. So if you have a gold plated watch face, for example, it's not prohibited, but it's still best to avoid, I would say, because sometimes you're giving the impression that it looks like it's made of proper gold or something. So it's better to avoid that. Even a pen, for example, just avoid, wearing having like a proper full gold pen. Just avoid gold for men. This is mainly for men, and it also becomes extravagant. Women's dress. Okay, women are required to cover the entire body except their face, right? And remember what the definition of face is, right? The definition of face is the same as wudu. When we define face, that's the definition of face. So cover their entire body except their face and their hands, and according to Imam Abu Hanifa, and their feet from the ankle. So the definition of hands are the ones that you wash in wudu the first time. Definition of feet is, what do you have to wash up to? Ankle, including the ankle. So that's the definition of feet. So these are the three parts that can be shown. Everything else should be covered up as long as they're in front of marriageable males. So what are marriageable males? Marriageable males are someone who's a male who you could potentially get married to. Potentially means you don't think the person is attractive or not. Doesn't matter if they're super ugly, you'd never marry that person. The fact that you could potentially get married to them because they're not your close family member. They're not your father, they're not your brother, they're not your uncle, they're not your son, they're not your, all of these different categories, which we'll cover in Islamic law too. You should not be without this proper clothing in front of those people. So that's what we say, a marriageable person. So marriageable males, you should always be covered in front of them. What about in front of females? In front of other females, the minimum is to cover the same that men are supposed to be covering in public. So what do men have to cover in public? Navel to the knee. So when women are in front of women, they should be covering from the navel to the knee. So why would they not be doing that? Swimming parties becomes a problem. All right. So if you wear a bikini and you say, well, look, there are no guys here, all right, and somehow you manage to put this frequency where you blocked Google Earth from actually looking at you from above, right? Then in that case, you still have the other women you need to deal with. So you should at least be covered from navel to the knee, right? And there are a lot of swimming, Islamic swimming clothes you can get. In front of other females, minimum is to cover same as public. The clothing must be opaque. It should not be transparent clothing, and the clothing should be loose enough to not portray any part of the body that must be covered. So that's a very important point. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes the guys can wear something too tight, the rear is showing. Same thing with sisters, they're wearing hijab, they're covering their hair or something, but they end up wearing something really, really, really tight here, and then the breasts are showing. Or they're wearing something really, really tight on their rear, or there's even, people who wear messages on their rear end, and they're wearing hijab. And that's, the culture is becoming really bad here. There's literally like messages that, and it's tight, and you want someone to look at your rear end. This is not it's not proper hijab or covering of for women. So just be careful of that. It's also prohibited for women to wear strong and enticing perfumed substances. So wearing strong perfume, which you generally end up attracting people from it from far away, something that should be avoided. But if you wear light perfume just to smell nice for yourself, maybe one person next to you can smell, you'll smell good, that's fine. But there's a lot of perfume, the allure and the passion and all these, different terms and all of that. They're generally used by people to actually attract the other opposite gender. You should not be wearing any of those things. It's allowed for women to beautify their faces, their hands with creams, nail polish, except for wudu, we talked about nail polish, henna, rings, eyeliner, etc. They can use all of that, but the rule that you should follow is the level of beautification that you do should not be extremely attractive or seductive, and that is culturally defined. So if you go and you put a little bit of makeup, little bit of eyeliner, little bit of this, and you wear a pink hijab, and you walk into Saudi Arabia in Mecca, okay, you're over the level. That's considered too much for that culture. But if you come and you do a little bit of that here in America, and everyone else is like decked out with all the foundation and this and that, all of that stuff, you're really not, you're generally okay at work and everything. So just understand it should not be at the level of becoming seductive and becoming like attracting other people. That should not be the level. And it happens sometimes. Sisters, they do, not realizing, they wear hijab, they do all of that, and they put so much makeup that literally it becomes attractive, and you find people becoming attracted to them because the way they dress themselves up. That should not be the case. So that's, other than that, everything else is fine. These are the general rules. You can wear anything else other than that. As long as these general rules are followed, everything else is allowed. So stop here, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.